Here we go. Hello and welcome to my latest YouTube video. And today the subject matter is the next Scotland men's national team manager. And it's an intriguing one, this one, because typically when it comes to new managers, the search for a new manager, there's at least a level of understanding, whether that be in the media, the bookmakers, supporters, as to who the main names in the frame are. When it comes to this pursuit of the successor for Steve Clarke, at the moment, it seems like nobody really has a clue. And that's commendable from the SFA's point of view in terms of the powers that be. I think it is Ian Maxwell, the chief executive, and the new chief football officer, Craig Mulholland, who are charged with this search. And at the moment, it's very quiet as to who the new manager is going to be. It's been around 6 weeks since Steve Clarke resigned after the disappointment of the performance at the World Cup finals, the group stage exit. And the current context is that recently, reports have emerged from the BBC that there's going to be a permanent Scotland manager recruited within the next 10 days or so ahead of the Nations League matches in late September, which came as a surprise to me. I envisaged the SFA, considering the short turnaround time from the World Cup, going with an interim manager for the Nations League before appointing a new permanent head coach ahead of the Euros qualifier starting in March time. But no, it appears as if the SFA are keen to have a new manager in place for the Nations League. So in this video I'm going to run through the current main names in the frame according to the bookmakers, and I'll give my thoughts on who I would like to see as the Scotland manager and my overall opinion on the situation. So starting off first is the current favourite, been favourite for a little while now, is Stephen Naismith, who was Steve Clarke's assistant at the time of his resignation. And the news of the possibility of Stephen Naismith being named the permanent Scotland manager has been greeted with a lot of discontent, I would say, amongst Scotland fans in the Tartan Army. And I can understand why, from my opinion as a fan. I think that Naismith is underqualified for this position in terms of his managerial CV. Yeah, he went in at Hearts, he started off well, it didn't end particularly well for him there at Hearts, and I just feel that at this stage of his coaching career, the Scotland job is a step too much for him. Having said that, I think some of the criticism that's been levelled at him, I think, is a bit unfair. You know, this idea that he's a company man, he's an SFA man, when I think he did earn his position as part of that setup. As I said, he, after a distinguished playing career in which he represented Scotland on over 50 occasions as part of our Roll of Honour, he actually played under Steve Clarke at the end of his international career. He then went into coaching at Hearts, where he coached the B team, then was named manager, was highly rated enough to do that. Started off in promising fashion, but didn't end too well. And he was not once, but twice recruited by Steve Clarke to be part of his staff. He was first a coach, and then once John Carver down the line decided to step aside, Steve Clarke decided to bring Naismith back into the fold for the 2026 World Cup qualifying campaign, which shows how highly Steve Clarke holds him in regard in terms of his coaching ability. And before I go into my next candidate, what I will say with Naismith is that he is a Scot, and I'm going to make the point now that my preference for any Scotland manager is for them to be from Scotland. My personal opinion on the matter is that there is eligibility criteria for players, and that this should be the same for the manager. Because in my opinion, the real figurehead of a national team is the manager, even more so than the playing squad. And it's the highest honour that a coach in Scotland can have, is to be named manager of their country. And I just think that there's something that is special about international football that should be protected. And it's us against them. It's our best against what the world's best have got to offer. And as such, I always prefer the manager of Scotland to be a Scot. I think ultimately, at the end of the day, it matters more to them. There's more of a natural connection between a Scottish manager with the players and the fans. And the final point on Naismith is, I'm not saying this should make him the next Scotland manager, because, as I've pointed out, I think he's underqualified and it's a step too soon for him. He's a very admirable individual. People might not be aware of how charitable Naismith has been throughout, his time in the spotlight in professional football. I read that in his time at Everton, he was known to give match tickets to homeless fans in the community. He's also worked with military veterans, and he is an ambassador for Dyslexia Scotland. So, in as much as I don't think it would be fair for Naismith to get the job, I do think some of the criticism that's been levelled against him is a bit unfair, and that he, for me, is somebody that could potentially be a Scotland manager of the future if he continues developing in the way that he is. My final point on Naismith is, I find it a bit baffling that he is the favourite and the front runner, considering Naismith himself recently, in an interview with Sky Sports, said that the next Scotland manager has to be somebody with a bit of experience, and that is something that definitely doesn't apply to himself. But having said that, he did say that he has been told in his conversations with the SFA that they're keen to keep him around, so there are roles there, whether he's on the coaching staff, whether he's filling the vacant managerial with under-21s. I would be more than happy to see Naismith stick around. I think he's a great guy. He's a distinguished player. He's been part of the coaching setup, and as I say, he's an admirable individual, so I've got no issues with him being part of the setup. Second in line at the moment is a candidate I identified early on once I heard the news about Steve Clarke stepping away, and his name has been continuing to gather momentum in recent days and weeks, and that is the Dane Kasper Hjulmand, who is most well known for being the manager of Denmark between 2020 and 2024. I think the highlight of his managerial career was Euro 2020, which was when Hjulmand became known to me, because I remember the tragic incident concerning Christian Eriksen at Euro 2020 when he had the heart attack. I thought Hjulmand was a real leader, not only for the Danish team, but the country of Denmark at that time. He spoke so well, he really stood out in terms of his charisma and his leadership skills, and he actually ultimately led Denmark to the semi-finals, which was a great achievement, where they were unfortunately knocked out by England, a dubious penalty at Wembley in the semi-finals. So that's a great achievement for Denmark to reach the last four. Following that, though, his time at Denmark as manager wasn't particularly great. They got to the World Cup in 2022, but they finished bottom of a group with France, Australia and Tunisia. And then at Euro 2024, they scraped through the group. I think they drew every game before they got knocked out by Germany. And I think I read that his last 7 major tournament matches with Denmark, he failed to win. In terms of his other credentials, in terms of his CV, he did very well at Nordsjælland as manager. He won their first ever Danish league title at Nordsjælland, where he had a bit of a reputation for bringing through young talent. And the reason why he could appeal is that he is known for being a proactive manager in which he places high emphasis on possession. And I think a lot of Scotland fans following the Steve Clarke tenure, when they're thinking about the next manager, they're keen for somebody to come in, be more proactive and see a better brand of football. And Hjulmand is somebody that is aligned with that vision. So I could see the logic behind Hjulmand. I think he would bring a freshness, a charisma, but he's got a mixed CV. He didn't do particularly well at Mainz as well in Germany. He only lasted a short spell there. Last season, he was actually manager of Bayer Leverkusen. He took over from Erik ten Hag, a chaotic start to this season, stabilised things, but ultimately they fell off towards the end of the season, and he was sacked with Bayer Leverkusen looking to go in a new direction. But I think his time at Leverkusen was mixed. So I can see the logic for the SFA. As I say, he's a charismatic individual. He'd bring fresh ideas. But at the same time, I would question with Hjulmand, is he necessarily better suited to the Scotland manager's role, in which he'll come in without knowing the culture of Scottish football or the squad in comparison to other Scottish candidates? Third on the list that I read with Sky Bet is John McGlynn, who initially was one of the front runners following Steve Clarke's resignation. It's gone a bit quiet since then. For me, the pros of John McGlynn are the fact that if you look at the coaching performance of Scottish managers in recent years, I think John McGlynn stands above the rest. He's a 3-time Scotland Manager of the Year. He's somebody that's worked his way up from the bottom. He's seen everything in Scottish football. He knows the game inside out. And I think it'd be a real credit for him to have worked his way up the ladder to reach that ultimate honour of being the Scotland Manager. And that's something that I think I would like to see rewarded in terms of John McGlynn. And there's a lot of criticism attached towards John McGlynn as well. Some fans are ridiculing the idea, but I feel that's a bit snobby in terms of what he's achieved with Falkirk over a decent amount of time now. Obviously, he's got a difficult job in his hands this year following the departure of a number of key players, but I think McGlynn is somebody that has proven himself to be an adept manager. Having said that, there are obvious cons to me as well. None more so than John McGlynn has never managed at this elite level. This would be a significant step up, and the jury is out as to whether his methods, his style of communication could translate to the elite level, and that is a genuine concern of mine. I think maybe the wise thing for McGlynn, if he was to get the job, would be to bring in either ex-players or young coaches who have experience in terms of the elite level of international football, whether that be a Stephen Naismith, who's already there. That could be a combination that potentially works. But the idea that John McGlynn is in no way qualified for this job, I think is unfair on his credentials as a coach. Next up is Roberto Martinez, who was becoming more and more linked with the job in the last couple of weeks, up until reports emerged that he was in the running for the vacant position at Netherlands. But since then, Xavi, the ex-Barcelona midfielder, has taken over that job. So Martinez is still without a job following his departure from Portugal in the summer. Martinez, for me, I've got a mixed opinion on the potential appointment. I think it's maybe overblown a bit, the extent to which he so-called ruined 2 golden generations with Belgium and Portugal. That is a tag that's been levelled with him. I think with Belgium, they actually performed really well, in my opinion, in the 2018 World Cup, where they faced the eventual winners France in the semi-final. They only lost 1-0 in that match. It was a set-piece goal. I think it was Samuel Umtiti. And that was a final before the final. I do believe if Belgium had snuck through past France in that semi-final, they would have beaten Croatia and become world champions for the first time. Having said that, his following performances in major tournaments for Belgium weren't good enough. And then at Portugal, he did win the Nations League, he did win major silverware with Portugal, but for me, his time at Portugal was characterised by his inability to rotate or leave out Cristiano Ronaldo. I thought that became farcical towards the end. And ahead of the 2026 World Cup, I thought Portugal had a great squad. Look at the midfield, it was well documented. They had the PSG midfield duo of Vitinha and João Neves in behind Bruno Fernandes, the best player in the Premier League last season, and I thought they flattered to deceive in the group stages before feebly get knocked out by Spain. So I didn't think that was good enough, and if Martinez was to get the job, I don't think he'd be coming in with a great deal of momentum behind him. Having said that, as I said, he did reach the semi-finals with Belgium, he did win the Nations League with Portugal, and these are two jobs in which he operated with the highest calibre of players. He previously did good work as a club manager with Swansea, Wigan and Everton, was successful to a certain extent with all three of those clubs, winning the FA Cup with Wigan before accumulating Everton's highest points tally ever in the Premier League in his first season. So he has done a lot of good work, he's experienced, but I would just question, going from Belgium and Portugal, playing with, world-class operators who are more than comfortable bossing possession, to coming in to Scotland where it's a very different project. I would just question whether he is the best suited candidate for this job, personally. And then finally, the fifth name on the list is my preferred candidate, and that is David Moyes. He's somebody that I've always had hopes for in terms of a future Scotland manager. It's a role that he himself has acknowledged he would like to take on at some point in his career. And the main critique of Moyes as the replacement for Steve Clarke has been, it's been seen as Steve Clarke Mark II in terms of Moyes being a pragmatic, cautious manager. And I do understand that. Maybe it's not the biggest step away in terms of tactics, but for me, Moyes is one of the most distinguished Scottish managers of all time. His longevity and achievements speak for themselves, in my opinion. He's won the third most amount of games in Premier League history, behind only the great Sir Alex and Arsene Wenger. He has fared well in football across multiple eras. He did well with Preston and Everton, and then after an awkward spell in the middle of his managerial career with Man United, Real Sociedad and Sunderland, he bounced back with West Ham on two separate occasions, and then also with Everton, stabilising all those clubs, and crucially performing well in Europe with West Ham and the Europa League, and then going on to win the Conference League, which was a career milestone. And I just feel Moyes has seen everything in football. He's a proud Scot. I think his managerial style is characterised by getting the best out of his players. He is pragmatic, but he is able to get the best out of the match winners at his disposal. And I think that he'll come in with a fresh pair of eyes, a fresh pair of ideas to Steve Clarke, but ultimately his priority will be to win and to achieve. And people may disagree with this, but I think Scotland have a really good squad of players. I think we could be playing a much more aggressive, high-pressing style than what we saw, certainly at the World Cup. But I don't think that we've got the calibre of player that can dominate matches against a lot of teams we'll be coming up against. And I think that somebody who does have a track record of getting teams to be organised and disciplined, such as Moyes, is not a negative thing with Scotland, and getting the best out of the best players we have available for us in the biggest moments, such as McTominay, McGlynn, Tierney, Robertson, Gilmour. What we didn't see at the World Cup, our main players really stepping up to the plate. I believe that somebody of Moyes' calibre can get a bit more out of them whilst retaining us as a nation that are difficult to beat. So overall, my main takeaway on the managerial situation is that I personally don't see the rush in appointing somebody before the Nations League. If you look at this Nations League campaign, for me the priorities are blooding some emerging talent. If you look at the top end of the pitch, we've got Kieran Bowie, who has re-signed back in the Serie A with Sassuolo, and obviously the exciting signing of Robbie Eure to Sevilla. I'd like to see both of them get an opportunity because I think we have a weakness up front. We saw that at the World Cup. I don't think Shankland quite cut it at that level. I think Shankland's still a worthy player to have in and around the squad. He's a great goal scorer, a great finisher, and he can come off the bench in certain games. But I think that number 9 jersey, I think Bowie and Eure are the future. And at centre-back, we had a weakness during the World Cup. It was well documented, that Brazil game. I think Luke Graham is going to Stoke City, could be the future of that left centre-back position. I think we've got a number of great young players in midfield, like Lennon Miller, Josh Mulligan, that can come in and make us better, perhaps. Out wide, we've got Calvin Miller, who's gone to Hearts, Josh McPake, other young guys such as Ryan Oney, Emilio Lawrence. So for the Nations League, I'd like to see some of these players blooded, and I'd like to see us play a bit more proactively in possession, see more of a style in possession. But I don't think that the results are overly important. Actually, with the Nations League, it might actually benefit us to remain in League B of the Nations League ahead of the 2030 World Cup instead of getting promoted by winning our section. And as such, I don't think it's of crucial importance we get a new permanent manager in place for these matches. Instead, I think the key timeline is that March window when we begin our Euro 2028 qualification campaign. I think that is the time in which it's crucial to have a manager in. And the reason why I would go for an interim manager for these Nations League matches is that the context might markedly change by the time those March internationals, the Euros qualifiers, begin. And that is because if you look at, say for example, interim managers to be Stephen Naismith, and for me, I would back that. He is a natural link between Steve Clarke going out and these next group of matches, which are quite close off the back of the World Cup. He knows the squad, he knows the players. He's a direct link, I believe, between Clarke and the players. He played for Scotland over 50 times. He knows international football. I have no qualms with Stephen Naismith on an interim basis overseeing 6 matches in this autumnal Nations League period. And then by March, people would disagree with this, but I don't think it's an invalid thing to say. If we flew through those Nations League games, playing great football, Stephen Naismith took to the role like a duck to water, I'd have no qualms him getting the full-time position. If we didn't look particularly better than we did at the World Cup, then it would prove that Naismith's not cut out for the job. And by March, David Moyes, my number 1 candidate, may well be out of a job at Everton. I know of Everton supporters I've read online that are not overly keen on Moyes taking the club forward. And by then, he may be assessing his position at the club himself because his contract at Everton runs out next summer. So by March, the Premier League season will be coming to a close. The fans may want someone new to lead them into a new era in their new stadium. Moyes might think it's the best time to take on the Scotland job ahead of the Euros qualifiers. By March, the context could be markedly different to now when a new season is just about to get underway. The context could change with John McGlynn. He may prove himself again with Falkirk this season in what he is acknowledged as one of his toughest jobs yet in terms of rebuilding Falkirk and maintaining their status in the Scottish Premiership again. And then other Scottish candidates such as Alex Neil, who I think is somebody who's high up the list in terms of the best performing Scottish managers at the moment, doing very well with Millwall. If he was to do very well again this season, have Millwall up near the top of the table by March, you could say he's earned his stripes to be the next Scotland manager. So for me, I would like to see an interim manager come in for the Nations League games before we reassess in March. But it seems as if the next appointment is nigh. And yeah, it's intriguing to see who it will be. Nobody seems to know at the moment. But that's all for me today. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a subscribe. That'll help me. I'm trying to grow this channel. Leave a like too. And also, if you have your opinion on who the next Scotland manager should be, make sure to let me know in the comments below. Thanks everyone.